this was the article. What Holocaust restitution taught me about slavery reparations. Now understand, given who I am, when I saw this, I said, oh my goodness. Well, maybe we have an ally who has dealt with Holocaust reparations who's going to come in here and help us with this, because we all hear the thing of we're all minorities and we're all minorities got to stand together, and everything that happened in Charlottesville, and they were all against us all, so we have to stand together. So I thought there was going to be some kind of reciprocity, somebody trying to teach us the path, and somebody trying to say, hey, here's how I did it, and here's how I can help you do it. That's what I thought I was going to see, but I didn't see that. I didn't see any of that. What I saw was something very different. What I saw was an argument from someone with a reputation, a history of fighting for, which I stand in support of. Holocaust reparations, I stand in support of it. But I have somebody who has spent his life working for Holocaust reparations who turned around and tell us, yeah, we did it for them, but we can't do it for you. For them it was necessary, but for you it's too hard. Stuart Eisenstadt. Okay, so let's go into a bit about what he did and what his history is, because you have to know a bit about a person's bio. You have to know a bit about who they are, where they come from, and you know what they've done. So it says, during Bill Clinton's presidency, I served in the newly created position as a special representative of the president and Secretary of State on Holocaust era issues. I led an interagency negotiating team that helped settle, let me make this a little bit smaller, that helped settle a series of class action lawsuits brought by American lawyers in U.S. courts on behalf of Holocaust survivors or their immediate relatives all over the world against French and Swiss banks. The banks had held funds deposited by Jews seeking to hide them from Nazis, but failed to admit their existence after the war when the survivors or direct heirs of victims claimed them. Instead, the banks took the money into their own profits. Sounds very familiar to a lot of stuff that we went through. We also settled class action lawsuits against European insurance companies that refused to pay beneficiaries on the specious ground that premiums were not paid while policyholders were in concentration camps. All of what I'm reading is sounding very, 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 very familiar. We obtained payments from hundreds of German and Austrian companies that employed Jewish slave laborers, working them to death, and non-Jewish forced laborers from Poland and other countries overrun by the Nazis. All worked under brutal conditions, but were viewed as wartime assets to substitute for German men conscripted to fight. Now, let me just say this real quick. I just want to make sure we're seeing the same things. Doesn't that sound like slavery? And doesn't that also sound like convict leasing? Do we not see similarities there of made to work by companies and corporations and all that stuff? Like you were forced to be the labor. So what you did, sir, is go after companies that forced you to be that labor, right? But somehow it's a problem when we do it. So let me just go ahead a little bit. We also arranged for restitution and private property. But let's see, we can go back through it. In Austria, compensation. Hundreds of thousands Nazi synagogues. So he's talking about all the compensation. Let's just keep going. During the Obama administration in 2014, when I continued this work as a special advisor to Secretaries of State Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. Now understand, this is a lifelong work for him. From what I see, this is a lifelong endeavor that he's doing right here to get compensation, to get recompense. Noble for survivors of the Holocaust and the people that stand in the shoes, because you came up with that. Okay? We negotiate reparations for non-French citizens, for deporting Jewish residents to death camps abroad, state-owned railway, and for their spouses and children. If they survive the war but die before our agreement. Since 2009, I have led annual negotiations with Germany on behalf of the Conference on Jewish Material Claims against Germany and obtained payments for pensions, home care, food, and medical services for survivors in or near poverty. Overall, we have managed to obtain a degree of justice, even if it is imperfect. It took decades and took painstaking process. Now, wait a minute. Would you not expect somebody who wrote how you painstakingly went to a grueling process to make sure that the victims of the Holocaust and their heirs got justice? Would you not expect that person to put forth support for a process where ADOS can do the same thing? You made this, sir. I don't know if you're clear, but you made this your life's work. What you did is you went out. Now understand what he said. He said we negotiated payments with companies. He said we negotiated he said the railways. He said this work was hard. He said, but in the end, we got justice for a group of people. Understand something, that's all we want. What you did for this group of people is all we want for this group of people. It's all we want. Justice is justice. And so let me just go through why this is important. Now, what he got and negotiated was money. Recompense. It wasn't any kind of flowery thing. It was actual money. So I want to bring this up to you. Slavery is a profound, this is still him. He's pivoting. Watch the pivot. Always watch the feet. He's pivoting. We got a runner. Slavery is a profound historical wrong, one whose brutal legacy permeates American life today. People of color is not the same as slavery. You're playing a game. Watch the feet. He's pivoting again. He's a dancer. People of color continue to suffer endemic discrimination in employment, housing, and new forms of voter suppression. As a result, by every socioeconomic, health, education, income, wealth, home ownership, and employment levels, they remain far behind white Americans. We must do more to acknowledge, confront, and end institutional racial discrimination. Let's keep going for 1 second. The common thread running through these, he talked about acknowledging and ending racial oppression, discrimination. But I want you to listen very carefully to what he said about the thing that separates our claim from the Holocaust victims' claims and the claims of their descendants. This is where he starts to talk about what separates us from them and that claim. Pay very close attention. The common thread running through these U.S.-led negotiations and those of the claims conference is that restitution has come from the direct perpetrators of the crimes and has gone largely to those who directly suffered and survived. And in some cases, their direct heirs. And even this was extremely difficult. In the Austrian property cases, there were 18,000 claims filed, largely by heirs of victims, with the Austrian claims process having to sort out competing claims among families. Controversy arose in the French railway case because payments went only to living survivors of the deportations or their spouses or their children if the deportee had died after World War II and before our agreement. Distant relatives of deportees were excluded. Now understand what he says right there when he says directly. He says directly. He says it should come directly to the person who was harmed. And in some cases, the people who are standing in the shoes, their descendants. And let me tell you why this is stupid. Let me tell you why this is dishonest and disingenuous. When you talk about the end of slavery, right? We were promised that 40 acres and a mule until the general, or was he a general? I forgot his name. He had to come back. He had to come back and say, I'm sorry. I know I promised you when you came into freedom, you were going to have something. You were going to get the 40 acres and a mule, but you're not going to get it. I know I promised you you were going to get reparations, but you're not going to get it. I'm sorry. And as a matter of fact, what Andrew Johnson did was redistribute all of that back to the Confederacy. Now, this is not a perfect analogy, but this is an analogy. This is akin to, let's say you are a victim of a crime. Let's say you are a rape victim. And every time you go to the police station and you say, I want to file a claim, statute of limitations, whatever it is. You say, I want to file a claim, this happened to me. And they say, go home. We ain't listening. Get away. You come back next year. I want to file a claim. I was victimized. You come back with a claim over and over and over again. Right? You come back with the claim and somebody sells you again. No. We're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. You come back again and you say, I want to file a claim. And they say, no, we're not going to do it. So what they done, it's not that you didn't go and try to file the claim and get your justice. You did, but the police is America and everybody told us, no, you can't. It's not our responsibility when we were mistreated. It's not your responsibility that you are outside the statute of limitations because you were mistreated. That's not our responsibility. It's not like we walked away and said, we don't want nothing. We're going to just go over here and then we came back. Either way, we would do. You can't hold us accountable for discrimination that was inflicted upon us by a country that didn't want to pay. What happens is we couldn't file a claim. You file a claim, you try to push this now, you're going to get hung from a tree. Because all we had was racial terrorism. But tell me this though, riddle me this, Batman. We still had people. We still had the last living person from the Black Wall Street riot just died a couple years ago. I remember seeing it a year or so ago. She didn't receive anything, and that's still in this era. America isn't paying because America doesn't want to pay. You don't hold the victim accountable. You don't hold the victim accountable when the police decided they didn't want to do their job. And in this analogy, that's the United States government. The United States government decided we're not going to give you nothing. We don't care how much you ask. We don't care what you do. We're not giving it to you. They did that to us. Not only did they do that, they said, not only are we not giving you 40 acres and a mule, we're going to leave you here with a bunch of racist white mobs, and they're going to hang strange fruit from these trees. And you know what it is. You know what it is. So then you can come accountable and say, then you're going to come here and write this thing and say, well, you see what? The problem is that you all are not the direct heirs. I don't care. And blame it on the government. That's not our fault. We tried to be. Our people tried to do that, and it didn't happen because the government stood in the way, and because mobs stood in the way, and because the KKK everybody stood in the way. You have to understand agency. And when I say that, the value of, we didn't have any agency. And you have to understand what we missed out on. So what we missed out on is the value of 40 acres is 2.3 trillion. After 10 years compounding 6%. So it's just under 80,000 a recipient. Just that. Understand that. And then not only did you not give us what we were owed, you said, guess what I'm going to do, black people? I'm going to make y'all a contagion to wealth. So not only did we not give you what you were owed, we're going to make it to where you can't build anything and anyone who's around you can't build anything. And then this man is going to write a piece and say we're not owed because we weren't directly enslaved. Think about the audacity. Think about the audacity to write something like that. You got to think about it. You got to think about it. Like, is this solidarity or is this white supremacy? He goes now to cost. Then there is the question of cost. Germany has paid more than 60 billion since 1952 for the horrors of the Holocaust and continues to this day to provide for those living survivors in special need, but not their descendants. Economic. That's because you provided to the person. Like, there are people standing in the shoes. You just admitted that some of the people are people who didn't directly didn't directly happen to. But if you give it to the actual victims, of course you don't have to give to the descendants because you gave to the victim. What are you talking about? Are you slow? So let me just go. So it continues to this day to provide for those living survivors in special need, but not their descendants. Economic estimates of the potential cost of reparations for distant heirs of slaves range from 500 billion to as high as 17 trillion, which is more than 3 times current annual federal spending. Who would pay for this? Please note the condescension. Who would pay for this? All American taxpayers would have to bear the burden of reparations, perversely including many of the intended beneficiaries. You have to understand what he's saying. Understand what he's saying. We redistributed. In DC, we gave slave owners. We gave slave owners reparations. We did redistribution of wealth back to the Confederates, who were the traitors. But he's telling us, don't mind any of that. We can't give you, the actual victims, anything, because it's too costly. I want you to understand one thing as we go into this. Always understand when somebody's trying to figure out how not to do something versus when they're trying to figure out how to do it. See, if he was trying to figure out how to do it, he could say, well, maybe this is going to take more than one generation because it's expensive. Maybe we could do it this way. We could try it this way. I know he know how to do it because you did it for Holocaust victims, so you know how to do it. You just don't think we deserve it. You just don't think we're worth it. And it's not your job to figure it out. The debt is the debt. We don't need you to figure it out. I know you can, though, because you've done it before. You can negotiate it. You've just decided that this group of people who are ADOS, we're not worth it. We're not worthy. All that negotiating you did, you talked about how painstaking it was and how hard you have to work through it. I'm not working that hard for y'all, though. I'm not doing that. It's too much. You don't deserve all that. The German government now is not the German government of the Nazi regime. It's not like Merkel is a Nazi. That's a totally different. The Hitler is gone. That's finished. That's a totally different government. But Germany still has to pay. America has the same government with the same kind of oppression, with the same multi-generational oppression, with the same discrimination, and you're telling me that Germany has to pay, but America doesn't. Your argument makes no sense, and it reeks of white supremacy, where you're just valuing whiteness and white life and white quality of life over ADOSness and blackness. That is white supremacy. You have a problem. And that problem has nothing to do with me. That problem has to do with your argument and where your argument originates from. He said, who would pay for this? I don't care. Listen, you have to close the racial wealth gap because this country created the racial wealth gap, which is really a lineage wealth gap. You created it. You fix it. I don't care who pay. Like, you don't want it. I don't care if you don't want it to come out of your pocket. I've said before on this show that we don't do a la carte politics. We don't do where you just go in and you hit something and you say, well, you know what? I don't want to pay for bombs today. So when I do my taxes, I'm gonna take that off. I don't want to pay for no military. You know what? I don't want to pay for subsidies for farmers. I don't want to pay for that. I don't want to do this. When I do I'm going to take that off. Take that off. It's not a restaurant, sir. A country has to pay its debts. And this is an unpaid debt. Now, we can negotiate how long it's going to take you to pay it. We can negotiate how we're going to do it. I know you know how to do it. We can do all of that. What we can't do and what we're not going to do is act like there isn't a debt owed. What we not gonna do is act like it's just too hard. You know, it's too hard and there's so much money. The monies, I don't know about the money. You print the monies, make more monies. But the fact that slavery is so much further in the past makes the logistics of reparations next to impossible. Even though some supporters of slavery reparations point to Holocaust reparations as a model, they are quite different. If you read the article, he said, you know, the slave masters didn't keep good records. The slave masters didn't keep good records. So there's no way to know who was a slave. This is when I know you're being disingenuous. Let me tell you something. For a very long time, up until around 1965, the Immigration Act it was mostly just white people and ADOS, right? That's who it was. We had the Immigration Act of 1965, and then we had a deluge of immigrants black immigrants post-19 with Ronald Reagan at the beginning, right? So if you are not a black immigrant to this country, which is fairly recent, for the most part, if you are not, then we know where you come from. Do you understand that you are running around? You are running around chasing people to Austria, all kind of places, trying to find the money for them. They in other countries. Of course it's complicated because your thing is global. You chasing everybody around the globe. Your stuff is very complicated. We are having a national discussion. Less than 1% of black immigrants. There was less than 1% of black immigrants, according to the Smithsonian, prior to 1965. Less than 1%. So that means if you can trace your lineage back generations, and we can do it, and the government can do it, and most of us already know if we got a grandmama or granddaddy here. We might not know it on both sides, but we know it. You know it. We all know it. We got sharecropping stories, everything. It's the most uncomplicated thing you can do. You know why? Because we're not scattered around the planet either. ADOS, we right here because we really ain't got the money to be scattered nowhere. You ain't got to chase us. It ain't be like, well, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of them in Israel. And there's a lot of them in Switzerland. And there's a lot of them over here in Sweden. There's a lot of them in America. We got to find them everywhere. That's not our case. We don't have a globalized group. Our group is still right here. Heck, half of them still live. All of us, half of ADOS, we live where our people pick cotton at. You ain't gotta work hard to find us, sir. And there was something else he said in the article. He said something to Cynthia. He said, you know, another thing is reparations doesn't poll high. He said reparations doesn't poll very high, and so it can't happen because most people are opposed to it. Well, first of all, I don't know. I really like to see how many Germans were in favor of reparations for the Jewish community, or whether or not you just did that because it was the right thing to do because of justice. Listen, either you're on the side of justice or you are not. Either you're working for justice or you are not. Ain't no in between. And let me just say this, when you talk about polls, there are some interesting polls to look at from the past. When Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, he was less popular than Donald Trump is today. That was written in 2018. So I'm just pointing out to tell you, like, justice is justice. I don't have to point to the poll. So this is why you don't live your life based on a poll. This is why you live your life based on a justice and collective uplift. You don't live your life, and nobody, if you tell me that you want what's best for ADOS, you don't live your life based on polls. I don't care. Don't call yourself a white ally if you're talking about, well, most people don't want to do it. I don't care. And let me tell you something. If I were around after the Holocaust, I would have said, yeah, you owe them money. You owe them something for what happened to them. And I wouldn't have cared then, because I'm that person. That's who I am. That's who I am, and that's who everybody should be, but everybody's not like that. This is the most consequential discussion about reparations since Reconstruction. Listen, you either focused on justice or you ain't. That's it. There is no in between. There is no, well, I'm kind of. There is no, well, it's hard. You didn't say it was hard over there, so don't come over here talking about how it's hard, because over there you was fine, and over here all of a sudden you got problems. Over here you confused. Over there you was doing all kind of complex global payments and making it happen and making it work, and you were going all over the world to do stuff. But over here all of a sudden you don't know. Over here you don't know what to do. Over here with ADOS you're confused. You don't know whether to wind your butt or scratch your watch. Okay. But that says more about you and who you are and what you think of us and what you're willing to pay for us and how invested you are in us. You didn't even come and say, listen, I need reparations to be multi-generational because of the cost. We can talk about that. We can have a conversation. You didn't say that. You said it can't happen. Then you went and you started talking about how everything has to come through equality. Everything has to come through equality. With this in mind, there are better ways to promote the healing of this country needs than a formal reparations program. More feasible and urgent would be committing the nation to reducing inequality in income and wealth by making targeted and thoughtful investments to lift up both low. What he's basically saying is you don't get nothing. I'm not closing. He said, I'm not committed to closing the racial wealth gap. I'm committed to giving money, giving your reparations to everybody. Now notice he didn't tell Holocaust victims to do this at all. He didn't tell Holocaust victims or their heirs that he was going to give all their money to everybody for a universal uplift. That didn't happen. But for us, the solution is to give something to everybody. I want you to understand one thing as we go into this. Always understand when somebody's trying to figure out how not to do something versus when they're trying to figure out how to do it. I know he know how to do it because you did it for Holocaust victims, so you know how to do it. You just don't think we deserve it. You just don't think we're worth it. Hitler is gone. That's finished. That's a totally different government, but Germany still has to pay. America has the same government with the same kind of oppression, with the same multi-generational oppression, with the same discrimination, and you're telling me that Germany has to pay, but America doesn't. Your argument makes no sense, and it reeks of white supremacy. Understand something, that's all we want. What you did for this group of people is all we want for this group of people. It's all we want. Justice is justice.